Coming up, for the first time, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol sits down with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. We look into what the two talked about on the sidelines of the G20 summit. Russia launches its biggest barrage of missiles against Ukraine, and reports say at least one missile may have landed in Poland. All this as a G20 statement is expected to include condemnation of Russia. Plus, BTS does it again for the third year in a row. The K-pop sensations made the list of nominations for the Grammys. This year's nominations are for Best Music Video and Best Pop Group Performance. Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. We begin this morning as President Yoon Suk-yeol is back home this morning. Having wrapped up his trip to Southeast Asia for summit diplomacy, the South Korean leader jetted off last Friday to attend ASEAN summits in Cambodia and the G20 summit in Indonesia, where he held separate talks with leaders of the U.S., Japan, and China on the sidelines. And more diplomatic events await him. This week, President Yoon will meet visiting Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, and Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, in Seoul. Discussions will focus on cooperation in chips, electric vehicles, and renewable energy. Now, on the last day of his trip before leaving the G20 summit, President Yoon sat down with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. This is the first time the two met face-to-face and comes amid heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula, with signs that North Korea's next nuclear test is imminent. Our editor-in-chief Moon Gun-young was traveling with the president.
Once again, I express my condolences to the bereaved families of the victims of a recent accident in Seoul and send my heartfelt words of support to those injured.
얼마 전 서울 이태원에 있었던 이 참사에 대해서 애도를 표현해 주셔서 감사드립니다.
The first in-person meeting between President Yoon Suk-yeol and Chinese President Xi Jinping began on a softer note, with the men expressing grief over those affected by a recent crowd crush in Seoul that led to the death of 158 people. The face-to-face coming on the sidelines of the summit of the Group of 20 Advanced and Emerging Economies was confirmed last minute, evidencing both delegations' awareness for a need, at the same time highlighting the sensitivity of the Seoul-Beijing ties. The first between leaders of South Korea and China since the Seoul-Beijing-Tokyo Trilateral Summit in December 2019, the tete-a-tete was little more than a get-to-know session, lasting 25 minutes, but with much riding on, taking into account the geopolitics of the region.
우리 정부의 외교 목표는 동아시아와 국제사회의 자유, 평화, 번영을 추구하고 기여해 나가는 것입니다. 그 수단과 방식은 보편시와 국제 규범에 기반하고 있습니다. 중국의 역할이 매우 중요합니다.
With experts warning that a nuclear test by North Korea is imminent, President Yoon called for China's input in preventing the North from going ahead with it. To this, the Chinese leader said he would support Mr. Yoon's audacious initiative policy toward North Korea, but that the success of the policy would depend on Pyongyang. Yoon is also expected to have explained his new Indo-Pacific strategy that he unveiled in Phnom Penh over the weekend.
China and South Korea are close neighbours that will always live next to each other, partners that cannot be separated. China is ready to work with South Korea to scale up communication and coordination at the G20 and other fora, jointly practice true multilateralism and safeguard overall peace and stability in the region.
Mr. Xi added that he would take up on South Korea's invitation for his visit once the COVID pandemic has been settled. The six-day two-nation tour intended for the ASEAN and G20 summits and related countries turned out to be more than that for the South Korean president, having met face-to-face with leaders of 3 of South Korea's key nations. With takeaways from these summits to materialize, more summit diplomacy awaits Yoon in Seoul as a number of heads of state are visiting the country in the next several days. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News.
Now, in his G20 summit debut, President Yoon urged members to refrain from excessive protectionism. The South Korean leader highlighted the need for such efforts to better deal with food and energy crises while contributing to global health. Yoon Jung-min reports.
A call for global solidarity and cooperation to overcome crises took center stage as South Korean President Yoon debuted at the G20 summit on the final day of his Southeast Asia trip, addressing the food and energy security session. He revisited his promise of contributions by South Korea as a responsible player in the international community. To this end, President Yoon urged the international community to refrain from excessive protectionism in order to stabilize prices. He put forth his vision for a green transition to sustainability, holding up as examples South Korea's smart farming and its use of nuclear power and renewable energy. And he rolled out a vision to help developing countries achieve low-carbon green growth. Calls for solidarity and contribution were echoed by the South Korean president as he took part in the health security session, citing his government having raised its budget for official development assistance next year, despite having to tighten its belt. On top of that, South Korea has promised a $300 million contribution for access to COVID-19 tools accelerator and $100 million for the global funds to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. He also pledged a more active role in the G20's pandemic fund. At the multilateral summit, the South Korean president met a number of world leaders, including those of Canada, Germany, the UK, and India, some of whom expressed condolences over the recent crowd crush in Itaewon. Meeting India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, they talked about cooperation on economy, business, and democracy, and Modi invited Yoon for a visit at a future date. President Yoon also met the new UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who said he looks forward to continued close cooperation with Seoul. Yoon Jong-min, Arirang News.
Now, a Western-led push to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine dominated the Group of G20 summit in Bali. A draft declaration was drawn by members to strongly condemn Russia, but it's yet to be adopted at the summit. Our Min Soo-kyun reports.
Leaders of major economies were grappling with an array of regional and global issues at the G20 summit. And of course, one of the most pressing issues was Russia's war in Ukraine. Hosting the event, Indonesian President Joko Widodo opened the summit with a call to end the war.
Being responsible here also means that we must end the war. If the war does not end, it will be difficult for the world to move forward.
In a virtual address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also strongly urged world leaders to take steps to help end the war in his country, telling delegates now is the time to push for peace.
Every day of delay means new deaths of Ukrainians, new threats to the world, and an insane increase in losses due to the continuation of Russian aggression. Losses for everyone in the world.
Many world leaders extended their support for Ukraine, and a joint declaration was drafted at the G20 summit to condemn Russia's war in Ukraine. European Council President Charles Michel called on members to put more pressure on Moscow to end this senseless war, while German Chancellor Olaf Scholz stressed that the use of nuclear weapons was unacceptable. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak also said there was international condemnation of the war.
Well, this morning at the G20, we saw international condemnation of Russia's war in Ukraine. And with Russia's foreign minister sitting there, we highlighted both the illegality and barbaric nature of Russia's war, and also the devastating impact it is having on people around the world through higher food and energy prices.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that the West had tried to politicize a joint declaration with phrases criticizing Moscow on behalf of all G20 members. But he said there were different opinions regarding the topic.
The West added a phrase that many delegations condemned Russia. We noted that alternative points of view were also conveyed.
Amid looming rifts over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, now the question is whether the reportedly 16-page draft declaration will be adopted at the summit, especially when Russia is a member of the G20 grouping. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Now, over in the war front, as Russia launches its biggest wave of missile against Ukraine, reports say that some crossed into Poland, striking a village close to the border between the two countries. According to Polish media, 2 people have died as a result, while Russia has denied any involvement. Our Kim Yo-sun has the latest.
Russian missiles have reportedly crossed into Poland, killing 2 people. That's according to the Associated Press, citing a senior U.S. intelligence officer on Tuesday. According to the report, Moscow's embarked on its biggest missile barrage against Ukraine on the same day. And it was the first time since the beginning of the Ukraine war that a NATO member country has been hit by Russian weapons. Following the news, the U.S. State Department said that Washington is talking to multiple partners, including the Polish government, to figure out what exactly happened.
We have seen reports out of Poland. They, of course, are incredibly concerning. And we're working with our partners in the Polish government and our NATO partners to get more information and to assess what has happened.
According to Poland's government, an emergency meeting was convened following the incident. Polish media reported that a projectile had struck a village located near the border with Ukraine Tuesday afternoon. It explained that neighboring Moldova was also affected, with massive power outages also reported in the country. Russia, meanwhile, has denied the reports, with its defense ministry calling them, quote, a deliberate provocation to escalate the situation. It said in a statement that the missile debris at the scene, seen in pictures reportedly taken by the Polish media, was not from Russian weapons. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia fired around 100 missiles at the country during the attack, most of them aimed at power facilities. He added that this has cut power supplies to some 7 million households. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea will be holding its annual college entrance exam known as Suneung on Thursday, with around 510,000 people signed up for the test. As it's a day before the exam today, the test takers will get their admission tickets, which they need in order to take this highly secure and monitored test. This is the third of its kind since the pandemic began, and like the 2 past years, those with symptoms of COVID-19 will take the test separately. Those who are in isolation or who have been admitted to hospitals due to COVID-19 will also be able to take the test. The exam starts at 8:40 a.m. and the whole country will make efforts to help test takers perform their best. Factories around exam centers are requested to stop operating, and some companies will have employees come in later to reduce traffic. Flights will also be rearranged so they don't disrupt the English listening test. K-pop sensation BTS has snagged Grammy nominations for the 3rd consecutive year after receiving 2 major nominations for 2023. The group has been nominated in the Best Music Video category for the song Yet to Come and is also vying for the Best Pop Duo Group Performance Award for My Universe, a collaboration with Coldplay. This is the first time Korean artists have been nominated in more than one Grammy category in any given year. BTS was previously nominated for Best Pop Duo Group Performance in 2021 for Dynamite and in 2022 for Butter. U.S. midterm elections wrapped up last week, and the results have shown that Democrats have held on to the Senate. While the vote counting isn't finished for House of Representatives, so far it's likely that the Republicans will take the majority there. However, the Democrats didn't lose as big as many experts had warned, with a predicted red wave never materializing for the GOP. Now, what does this mean for South Korea in terms of President Biden's stance on foreign policy from this point? Let's connect with Kim Yoon-wook, professor at Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Now that Biden will have some domestic political backing, do you think any details of the Inflation Reduction Act will change before? Many experts saw the bill as a means of rallying votes. Will there be revisions that will help placate Korean electric car makers?
I don't think the revision of the act itself would be easy because now it's the Congress is held by Republican Party. and the Democratic Party still keep its majority in the Senate. So it's pretty much divided. So if any party wants to revise the ILA, I don't think it's easy. The only way to change some content that's related to the South Korean car companies is to change some of the regulations related how to implement the ILA Act. But I'm not sure how much effective that revision would come up with South Korean companies. Maybe a little bit, proclamations of the ILA to be effective. I think that will be pretty much what the South Korean government and the U.S. government can do to deal with the ILA Act when it's implemented to countries, to companies like South Korea and European countries that's related to this ILA Act.
Right. Now I want to shift focus to the Korean Peninsula. Will Biden administration be able to take even bolder steps towards its goal of North Korean denuclearization on the back of these midterm results?
Well, the U.S. government mentioned that if China does not do any measures to prevent North Korea to do something further, like in nuclear test, the United States has to increase and enlarge its military presence in this region, which would be very burdensome, action by the United States from the perspective of China. So I think as far as the dialogue and negotiations, the U.S. posture is the same. It will not change its posture. It will stick to the original attitude that it's open to North Korean dialogue, but everything should be negotiated and discussed when the dialogue begins. So I don't think the U.S. is willing to give any extra positive incentive to North Korea as a condition to initiate a dialogue, but rather it will stick to bolstering and strengthening extended deterrence measures to allies in this region, along with bolstering sanctions, especially on China. I think pretty much the priority of the U.S. policy is China, so I think the U.S. will try to use the North Korea issues to squeeze China.
Right. Now, former President Trump is looking to run again. How will that affect the general atmosphere of U.S. politics going forward? Will he again start questioning trade agreements that the U.S. has with other countries in an attempt to get voters on his side?
I'm not sure if Trump is now an upper hand in presidential election, because now throughout this midterm election, pretty much many of the candidates that he supported did not succeed, which came up with some criticisms even within the Republican Party. And I think the outcome of this midterm is, in the main because of anti-Trump atmosphere in the United States. If Trump wins and the Republican wins in the midterm elections and Trump gets some momentum in his presidential election in 2 years, maybe that's not good for the United States itself. That's general atmosphere in the United States, and that has worked towards the Democratic Party to win at the Senate. I don't think, we'll see how it goes, but who will be the Republican Party candidate for the president? We'll see who wins the Republican Party election, whether it's Trump or DeSantis. We'll see how it goes. But maybe a little bit of adjustment is expected, even though Trump becomes a president. There are a lot of ways to achieve America first. Even President Biden's policy is gearing towards the America first. So we'll see how he's changed policies, his policy changed, his attitude changed over time.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your insights this morning, Professor, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning, Doyon.
Now let's start in China, where residents of Guangzhou have protested more COVID-19 lockdowns.
Well, that is right. The violent protests took place in the Haizhu district of Guangzhou on Monday evening local time. Now, footage shows residents overturning police cars, removing containment barriers and confronting riot authorities. Protesters say that the lockdowns have meant that they have been unable to earn a living and that they've suffered food shortages and sky-high living costs. Now, this comes 11 days after stay-at-home orders were issued in the area following a spike in COVID-19 infections, with Tuesday's figures breaching 5,000 cases locally. Across China, daily cases surged past 17,000. Now turning to the West Bank, where a Palestinian has killed 3 Israelis and seriously injured 3 others before being shot dead by Israeli security forces. The attack on Tuesday came near a Jewish settlement in the area. 2 of the victims died from stab wounds and the 3rd was killed after the attacker drove into them with a car. The Palestinian attacker was then fatally shot while trying to escape on foot. No motive has been given and no faction has claimed responsibility for the attack. The incident comes a day after a 15-year-old Palestinian girl was shot dead by the Israeli military during a raid. Israeli-Palestinian violence has risen in 2022. This year alone, 25 Israelis and 130 Palestinians have been killed, the most in 16 years. Now, Google is set to pay a record-breaking fine over allegations that it tracked users' location data without consent. Coming to $391 million, it's the biggest privacy-related fine brought forward by more than one U.S. state. The tech giant was accused by 40 U.S. states of tracking locations of people who opted out of these services. Investigation into the matter started after a 2018 Associated Press report showed that the locations of opted-out customers were still being tracked. Google will also now be required to disclose more information about its tracking practices at the opt-out prompt. Location tracking is a major part of the internet giant's targeted advertising strategy. It brings in an additional $200 billion in ad revenue each year.
Hello, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with the latest weather updates. Today is Suneung Orientation Day. Test takers visit test sites to see where they will be taking tomorrow's exam. And unlike previous years, there will not be brief cold snap on the day of Suneung this year, with temperatures hovering above the norms in most parts of the country. But the dust level remains in the bad category in South Gyeonggi-do and Chungcheong-namdo provinces today. Then western regions will be covered with dust tomorrow. Now, Jeollado provinces could see spotty rain passing, with inland regions covered with dense fog this morning, so please drive with care. Morning temperatures are 2 to 5 degrees higher than the same time yesterday, but highs will be similar to Tuesday. Seoul sees a high of 13 degrees Celsius, Daegu, Gyeongju, Gwangju topping out at 16 degrees this afternoon. Rain is in the forecast on Saturday, then the rest of the country will be under mostly sunny skies for the rest of the week, with wide gaps in the readings expected for the time being. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for our Thursday's edition at the same time. Please stay with Arirang News though for more updates throughout the day. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are, and take care.
fix